The United States' plan to assert control over Venezuela and its oil industry is, let's say, a hot topic here in Alberta after U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on Saturday morning. President Donald Trump was clear that ramping up oil production in the country is a top priority.
We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
Now, for his take on what this could mean for Alberta's oil industry, we have Richard Masson with us in studio. He's an executive fellow at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy, also the former CEO of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. Good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning, Lauren.
Well, what do you make of what Donald Trump said there?
Well, it sounds like a lot of ambition, and it's going to take a heck of a lot of execution for any of this to happen. The companies he's talking about, the big companies like ExxonMobil, Conoco, Chevron, they have to have proper risk-adjusted returns. Their boards of directors and their shareholders, pension funds, mutual funds, all those things, insist on it. So it's not like he can just say, go to Venezuela and fix it. That's not how it works, because it's going to take probably $100 billion at least over the next decade to do that. And in order for that to happen, you need to put in place a stable government. You need to have a stable legal system. You need to understand the contractual obligations, production sharing agreements, royalty systems. You need to be able to work with PDVSA, who has a monopoly right now on all production in Venezuela. So there are so many things that have to be changed to even set a framework to allow those companies to then assess, is this something I want to do relative to all the other opportunities I have in the world? And you know, we're a long way from that.
PDVSA, just to say, is the state-run oil company.
Right. When they nationalized U.S. assets and other assets from Europe, it all went into PDVSA, and they had control over the oil industry for the last couple decades.
How do you come to that number, $100 billion over 10 years to get things, you know, to sort of a humming production, if that's
Yeah, I've seen that number quoted by others. I mean, nobody has a real idea, but to put it in context, in Alberta, we have been working steadily to improve production here over decades. And in the oil sands, in 2014, the peak year, we invested 40 billion Canadian, and typically we invest 20 billion a year just to keep our industry kind of running. 15 of it is maintenance, 5 billion is expansion. It takes a lot of money for these projects. It's not like in Saudi Arabia where you can drill a bunch of wells and the oil comes out of the ground. This is heavy, heavy oil. It requires diluent to move it. It requires pipeline systems. It requires heated tanks. It requires special ports. All of this takes a lot of effort, and it's not going to happen unless there's a lot of certainty around how the whole country is going to work for the next decades.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, given all of that, what do you expect this means in the short term for the oil industry in Alberta?
Well, it's been a pretty unsettled morning so far. So I see many of the Canadian-based heavy oil companies, Canadian Natural and others, are down significantly, 7% this morning, which is hard to understand in the sense that they probably won't produce one less barrel anytime soon. In fact, Venezuela production has been curtailed completely because of the embargo. So there's less barrels being produced today than there was last week. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, what could happen? Yes, eventually there could be an increase in production that moves to the Gulf Coast from Venezuela. But in the context of 103 million barrel a day oil market right now, and this is a small amount. It's 900,000 barrels a day that Venezuela is currently producing. If that gets redirected from China to the Gulf Coast, it means China is going looking for barrels other places. So it doesn't mean there's going to be any less production or any less demand. So I don't expect a big change in prices, and you know, although it's unsettled, I expect by the end of the week it'll be much more stable than it is today.
We also heard a bit of a reflection earlier on the show about where Venezuelan oil arrives in the U.S. versus these refineries that have Alberta crude piped down. Like, in terms of the supply chain, how insulated are Alberta producers from having to compete directly with that?
So we have captured the Midwest market. The Chicago, Minnesota, big refineries all rely wholly on Alberta bitumen, diluted bitumen, and synthetic crude. then once we saturated that market, we built pipelines to get to the Gulf Coast because those refineries had been designed for Mexican Maya heavy crude and for Venezuelan diluted bitumen. And so when they couldn't get enough of those things, Maya has been in decline for a long time, and Mexico just built a refinery that's using more of it, so less is available. They became more and more desperate to get our heavy oil. So yes, we have a great market down there, 500,000 barrels a day that's been growing. I don't see us getting forced out of that market. We know how to compete on price, and we're very efficient at what we do. It's a long ways for Venezuela to try and take that market away from us.
So, okay, well, let's look further down the line, a long ways, as you say. If the U.S. plan does eventually work and production is ramped up significantly, what are the implications for Alberta?
Well, the biggest one would be less market demand in the U.S. and those Gulf Coast refineries, which says to us, well, we need to be able to reorient our sales. The Trans Mountain expansion was 600,000 barrels a day. That is nearing capacity. And much of that, more than half, is going to China right now. And so when we built it, we thought, well, a lot of it's going to end up in California because the tankers are relatively small. As it's turned out over the last year, more than half has gone to China. We can continue to grow our sales to Asia, which is the world's growing market, if the U.S. is less dependent on us. In some senses, that makes sense. Venezuela is a lot closer to the Gulf Coast. We're closer to Asia rather than oil going from Venezuela through the Panama Canal. So there is some logic to that as long as we can make sure that the transportation infrastructure is available.
So you figure this supports the case for another West Coast pipeline?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Canada needs better market access anyways. I always try and frame it as market access because a pipeline is one option. There are other ways to get market access as well, and including making the pipelines more efficient with partial upgrading and other options. So we should keep our minds open about how we do this because a pipeline is probably 10 years away for us, and we need to be able to focus on what can we do next year and the year after because that's really important.